Hello everyone, welcome to the first DFAT ANCP webinar in 2019. I'm Vicky at Ethics Learning Team. To start, can I please have someone to type into the chat area to confirm that the sound is coming through? Thanks, Jess. So this is the area where you can type in your questions or let us know if you are experiencing any technical difficulty. When you're listening to the webinar, it's best to close all the background applications to avoid technical problems. Before I introduce our speakers, I'll quickly go through some housekeeping matters. Right. As I said, it's best to close all your background applications. The sound will come through better that way. Sorry, we don't have dial-in option, but don't worry because the webinar will be recorded, and after the webinar, I'll send you a link to the recording. Oh, thanks, Martin, for the tips. Turning off Outlook helps. Right, I'll now quickly go through some housekeeping matters. Today's webinar will be recorded and uploaded to Avid YouTube channel. And then after the webinar and when the link is ready, I'll send everyone a follow-up email. I'll also include a copy of the presentation slides in PDF format. After the webinar, please stay and complete a quick survey. There are only 5 questions. As the presentation goes, feel free to type in your questions in the chat area. Our presenters will answer questions as they go or at the end of the presentation. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers, Rosemary from DFAT and Jeff from Ide Consolidated Proprietary Limited. Welcome, Rosemary. Welcome, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you, Vicky, and good afternoon to everyone. I hope that the sound issues that people were having are better now, and I'll do my best to speak loudly into the microphone. Yeah, so as Vicky and I'd like to say, welcome everyone to the 2019 Recognised Development Expenditure webinar, the first one for the year, which I'm sure everyone is excited about. Yeah, it's great to talk to everyone, you know, probably for the first time of the year through this webinar, but of course we look forward to the year to come and all the ways that we'll engage with all the NGOs, whether it's in person or through other webinars that we host. So as Vicky said, my name is Rosemary Welsh. I'm a Program Officer in the ANCP program. Some of you who tuned in last year might be wondering where Mighty Horden is and why she's not presenting. So Mighty's on a field trip at the moment, which is why I'm here. And also just to welcome, do a few welcomes of people who are also here in the room with me. First of all, I've got Jen Alexander, who's also a part of the ANCP operations section. She's just here to help out with the day. And we've also got Jeff Simkis from PK Consolidated. Some or most of you may be familiar with Jeff. He worked on the RDE last year, and you know, if some of you had spot checks, he was involved in that, or maybe some of you have seen Jeff if you have recently or are coming up to going through accreditation. I don't know if Jeff would like to say hello.
Just welcome everyone.
Okay. I guess as well, just a few other housekeeping things before we really get started. Just to save you all taking copious notes, as Vicky said, this presentation will be uploaded to the AFID YouTube channel, and they'll also send out the presentation afterwards. But alternatively, if you haven't, you know, managed to get a copy of that presentation, more than happy for you to email ancp@dfat.gov.au, and would happily share that presentation with you. Okay. All right, so just to kick off with an overview of what we're going to run through today. a lot of what we're covering today is actually in the RDE Explanatory Notes. So I hope everyone who's tuned in today has had a chance to read them, or if alternatively after today, if you can go and have a read of them, that will really help things sink in. There are really no major changes from last year. I think in 2017 was where some kind of big updates happened, but from last year, so 2018, this year there are no major changes, only a few clarifications which we hope just make things simpler for you, to translate the RDE concept into the submissions that you submit. Just also to let everyone know today, we've got NGOs who are accredited as a part of the ANCP. We also have NGOs who are not accredited. So today the pitch is really going to be starting from the first concept of what is RDE, and then move through the whole process. So just apologise, if some of you have gone through this before, but we encourage you to stay tuned with it and stick with us throughout the hour that we've got. Okay. Yeah, and also just to let everyone know, so after we run through what is RDE, we'll run through the worksheet that you go through when submitting your applications on ANCP online. We'll run through some common errors that we've picked up over the years to hopefully try and eliminate them. And then we'll run through the RDE Spot Check process, because some of you may be involved in that. And then lastly, we'll finish off with where to get advice and some of the resources that we have available. Okay, so really starting off here with the RDE principle. If we just go through it here on the screen, so RDE is the recognised development expenditure, is the annual eligible expenditure of a non-government organisation using contributions from the Australian community. Eligible expenditure is for the NGO's own development and humanitarian activities overseas and development education in Australia. So if we go back to the first section, it's the expenditure that your NGO has spent in the last financial year. So it's not the income or it's not the revenue that's generated from your NGO, it's the expenditure. Then unpacking the next section, so it's from funds raised from the Australian community. So that's not government organisations or foreign donations, just funds raised from the Australian community. And the eligible items that you can include in your RDE submission is for your own development projects or humanitarian and development education. And just a note here, this will make sense as we move through the form, but your eligible contributions can include donations of cash and gifts in kind and volunteer services. So up to half of your RDE can be for eligible gifts in kind and eligible volunteer services. Yeah, so yeah, cannot exceed the cash that you've raised. Okay, so going into the purpose as for why do we collect RDE. So up here we've got two reasons. So first of all, it's to determine that you're still eligible to be accredited. So for base NGOs, you need to have an RDE average over the last 3 years of $50,000. And for full NGOs, that's $100,000 averaged over the previous 3 years. The second reason is that we use RDE to calculate the ANCP grant for each full level NGO. So this is stated in the ANCP funding policy that's available on the DFAT website, but just to remind everyone, full level NGOs receive $300,000 plus a proportion of funds commensurate with RDE. And as you would know, base NGOs get $150,000 per year. So there's two things that RDE does not do. So it does not help or it does not assess the financial viability of an NGO, and it does not provide us with an indication of the effectiveness of your NGO. So essentially, as we've said before, it's purely a financial figure that tells us the amount of funds that's raised from the Australian community and expended on legitimate development activities. Okay, so as you would have seen from the Rte Explanatory Notes, there are a lot of references to the audited financial statements, and these audited financial statements, they need to be submitted in your RDE application through ANCP online. So I guess some of you may be asking, well, why do we link RDE to NGOs' audited financial statements? Firstly, it's so we can have confidence that your audited financial statements have been checked and signed off by an audited by an independent and appropriately qualified person. So I guess that just gives us that level of assurance when we're using your RDE to calculate grant agreements and to check eligibility for the ANCP program. So your audited financial statements, they should accurately reflect the agency's true financial situation, as well as compliance with the ACFID Code of Conduct. It provides us with greater transparency and consistency, which again is essential. As previously mentioned, we use these figures to calculate ANCP grant amounts and accreditation. So I guess that's the basis as well as to why this is so important. And every amount in your RDE submission must clearly be reflected in your audited financial statements. If there are any figures that have been adjusted from your audited financial statements to your submissions through ANCP online, we ask that you submit either a reconciliation or working schedules just to support these variations. This is also really helpful and really useful when Jeff is going through all of your submissions. It helps him, understand why there are variances there, and it really does just eliminate that process of him coming to you, asking why there's a variance, and you coming back to him and that back and forth. So there is actually a spot in the form where you'll be able to upload this, this format, whatever it is, whether it's an Excel or a Word document. And as we move through the form, I can show you where to upload that. So we've just got a question that's come through here. So just to let everyone know, the question is, we would like to adjust the figure in the audited financial statements. Where can we show the adjustment? So as I move through the presentation, and there'll be screenshots of each of the forms online, I'll show you where the spot is for you to upload that document. Yeah, and so then the second question that's come through is, can we put adjusted AFS amount in RDE and upload the reconciliation? So yes, there's a spot in the form where you'll be able to do that. Okay, and there's just another question that's come through here. The question here is, where there are too many changes from the previous year. And the question is, yes, sorry, just to clarify for everyone here. So the question is, has the form changed from previous years? So the form overall has not changed. There are a few spots, as I said, where we've tried to clarify sections and make them easier for you guys to use. So definitely no major changes from last year, but there are a few updates or clarifications. as we continue to move through the presentation today, I've got screenshots of all the sections of the form that need to be filled out, and so I can detail where things have changed from last year. So hopefully that will answer your question as we move through the presentation. We'll move on to the next slide. This one here is the Ide Calculation Method. So I guess hopefully this is familiar to a lot of you, as this hasn't changed over the past couple of years. And it's hopefully quite straightforward to everyone. So as you move throughout the form, and as it's shown here on the screen, first you enter in your eligible disbursements, then you enter in your deductions, and the system will then generate your total cash by subtracting your deductions from your eligible disbursements. You'll then enter in your non-cash RDE, so that's your gifts in kind and your volunteer services. And then the system will add your total cash RDE and your non-cash RDE together to get your total RDE figure. Again, just noting that your non-cash RDE cannot exceed your cash RDE. So if your non-cash RDE does exceed your cash RDE, you'll just need to re-enter your total cash RDE figure in the spot on the form. And I'll highlight this as we go through the form so you can see exactly what to do. So once you've plugged in all of those figures, then ANCP Online, it generates your total RDE figure. So just to also go through a few other items before we get into the real fun bit of actually submitting your applications. So RDE submissions, they're due by 5 p.m. Sunday 31 March 2019. And as it says up on the screen, the 31st of March this year is a Sunday. So we just encourage everyone to hopefully, aim to have everything finalised by 5 p.m. on Friday 29 March. As Friday 29 March up until 5 p.m. is also the cut-off time for when you can get assistance, whether it's technical assistance from the ANCP team or whether you need technical assistance from ANCP Online, so if you're having trouble logging in. So we just encourage everyone to have, those kind of things sorted by Friday the 29th. For accredited NGOs, so the third milestone in your current grant agreement for 2018-19 is the submission of your RDE by 31 March. And unfortunately, extensions for RDE submissions are just not possible. We need this time to make sure that we can go through and check everything. Well, actually, so Jeff can go through and check everything, and we can make sure that we've got everything we've needed into how we prepare everyone's grant amount. So we really need that time just to make sure we've got everything set in stone. As many of you would be aware, the budget this year has been brought forward by a month, and it will be announced on April the 2nd. We sent out an ANCP bulletin on the 15th of January, just letting everyone know that the timeframes for DFAT calculating and advising NGOs of their 2019-20 grant agreements will remain unchanged and be done during May 2019. This will allow for all accreditation assessments that are currently happening to be finalised, to go through the Committee for Development Corporation, so the CDC, and then the final step of that is to go through the DFAT delegate. So as well, we need that time for that process to occur before we can finalise grant amount. Additionally, Jeff has 1 month just to go through every submission and make check everything's there, and he's got what he's needed. So this is just a short window for Jeff, and we couldn't couldn't make it any shorter, so we really need them in by 31 March. But after Jeff has checked all your submissions and we've gone through everyone's RDE and the budget is known, we'll calculate the grant amount for 2019-20 and we'll advise NGOs ASAP. So basically, as soon as we know, we'll get in contact with you so that you know as well. To submit your submissions through ANCP online, I sent out an email. It was either early February, with the link attached and advising everyone that the round is now open. It's also up here on the screen if anyone didn't get that email that was sent out. If you don't have it and maybe you're having trouble accessing it through here, more than happy for you to email the ANCP team and just ask for us to resend you that link, as that's easily done on our behalf. Early submissions are welcome if anyone feels inclined. Yeah, and so far I think we have one submitted, so thank you to that NGO for getting in early. A couple of days before the Friday the 29th, as that will be the last day in the office, the ANCP team here in Canberra will just do a quick check as to which NGOs have started an application and which have not. And we'll just do a quick follow-up and ring around to everyone just to make sure that you're on track and that there are no problems. So hopefully as well with that approach and with everyone trying to get it in, by Friday or definitely by Sunday, hopefully we'll have everyone in on time. Okay, so that's the rationale of RDE and the theory behind this super fun topic. I don't know, just want to quickly check. Jeff, did you have anything to add before we get into the form? No? Okay. So now, as I said earlier, I'll take you through the form and show you what to submit, how to complete the form, and just help you through the process and where you upload certain information. So this will be the first screen that's up on the presentation here when you click that link that was on the previous slide. Most NGOs, registered ANCP NGOs, you can just log in as you would normally through the login section. If, however, it's your first registration or first time using ANCP online and you need to register, you would go through the section on the right-hand side and fill out everything that's required. Normally, if you were doing this approach and registering for the first time, normally RDE submissions are done when you submit for accreditation. So it's definitely not required if you aren't an accredited ANCP NGO. However, it is okay for you to submit an RDE application if you felt inclined. It might be a good chance for you to lodge an application so it can be audited and you can just make sure that you prepared it in the correct way and that it is on track. One last thing, if you are registering for the first time, we ask that when you register, please use your organisation's name in both the name field as well as the organisation field. This just eliminates confusion when we see the submissions that come through online, so we know what NGO it is. So, for example, if I was registering and I registered as Rosemary Welsh, from now on, all my RDE submissions would be under Rosemary Welsh and not, for example, DFAT or whatever your NGO is. So we just ask that, you use your organisation's name in both fields. That's why it's just easier for us to track which organisation is submitting. unfortunately, that's just a system limitation that we can't change, so we hope that you can bear with us on that. So just looking here, we've just got a question that's come through. One here looks like it's from a new organisation. It says, can you please clarify if we have to submit the RDE by September or March next year for new organisations? So the 31st of March deadline is for accredited NGOs. So if you're an accredited NGO, you must submit by 31 March, as that's a milestone in your current grant agreement. If you are a new NGO that's looking to apply for accreditation, your RDE submission will form part of that accreditation application, which is normally around September, but that date this year isn't set in stone. But what you can do is submit an RDE application now if you would like for it to be checked, and just make sure that your RDE is prepared in the right way. So definitely not mandatory or a requirement if you are a new NGO for you to submit by 31 March, because this can be submitted in your accreditation application.
Three. Yeah. So yeah, as Rosemary said, so only submit if you would like me to review your application and identify whether it actually meets the requirements. When you do submit your accreditation application, you do need to submit 3 years, the last 3 years for RDE. So, but just submit the current one in respect for this year, and I can have a look at that and give you any advice.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. All right, so after you've logged in or registered, come to this next section here. So this next section is pretty straightforward as well. So you'll select your NGO from the drop-down list, and there is the other box here. So basically this can be used if your trading name is different to your legal name. So again, that field there is not mandatory, but just if you want to include your legal name if it's different to your trading name, that's if you want to include your legal name if it's different to your trading name, that's the spot that you can do it. The next section here, you enter in the last day that your RDE submission relates to. So basically we understand that NGOs have different end of financial years, so we just make sure that whatever date is entered in the financial year ended section corresponds to your last financial year, and it relates to the audited, all the information relates to the audited financial statements that you're submitting. So we've just got some other questions here which we'll run through. So going back to the question around new NGOs submitting applications, if you submit in March and fail, is there any negative impact? I'll hand over to Jeff for this one.
Thanks, Rosemary. Technically, no, because your assessment will be actually at the time you submit the full application. So if I'm only assessing 1 year's RDE, well, the RDE that's calculated for your accreditation is an average of 3 years RDE. So therefore, we have to assess all 3 years and then take an average over those 3 years. So that way, in any one individual year, you can actually drop down below the limit but still be okay on an average for a 3 year. So you wouldn't necessarily fail until the 3 years assessment is actually done. So you might be under in 1 year, but larger in the 2 other years. That's to cater for any issues in respect to funding or funding drops. So there's no implications if you're below the limit in that if you submit one for the current financial year or your last current financial year. for most NGOs 30 June 2018. In respect to the second question regarding just the name fields, yes, you only use the NGO name, not the person's name. If you've already registered, that should be the name that you should see in the drop-down box for the organisation. Thanks. Keep the questions coming. We'll address them as they come through, and I'll hand back to Rosemary.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Okay, so as we have said here, you go through your organisation name, you enter in the date of the financial year ended, and then the next question here is just the accreditation type, which is either going to be base or full. Yep, okay. And also just a reminder here, when you're going through and filling out this section, but particularly the whole submission, don't base your RDE on unaudited drafts of audited financial statements. The financial statements that you use have to be audited. Okay, so the next bit here is moving on to the actual financial details of the RDE submission. So the first one here is the eligible disbursements. So for eligible disbursements, there are 3 sections to complete. So we've got 1A, 1B, and 2. So the first one here is funds to international programs. And this figure here should be drawn directly from your audited financial statement. Yep, in the format that ACRED requires. Then the second one here in 1B is the program support costs, which are also drawn directly from the audited financial statement. And that's the same for section 2, which is the community education. So disbursements on Australian community education are eligible to be included in RDE subject to meeting the requirements of the definition of the ACRED Code of Conduct. So we just make sure that you're all familiar with that and you know if you can or can't apply it to your RDE submission. So eligible community education includes costs of producing and distributing materials and conducting educational meetings. These costs are often included in marketing or fundraising costs of many NGOs, and unless they're separated out in your audited financial statements, unfortunately you can't list this in your RDE. So we just encourage all NGOs to make sure that this section here is separated out in your audited financial statements, as it may be an opportunity that you're missing out on to maximise your RDE. And also, if you're looking to incorporate these, you must have appropriate systems and processes in place to capture and estimate the cost of the community education, which should be shown separately as a line item in your audited financial statement, which again is a requirement of ACRED. The explanatory notes, the Ide Explanatory Notes also provide an example as to how to proportionally calculate this for community education. So we've got 2 questions here that we've got, and Jeff put his hand up to answer these, so I'll pass the mic over to Jeff.
Yeah, they can see the questions. They can see the questions. Alright, so in respect to Anna's question regarding a specific project, so yes, you should include all funding under 1A. So 1A should be that total figure of funds to international programs. In the previous version of the RDE, that used to be total disbursements. So 1A should be the total figure of all funds that's actually sent overseas. Then we will get to another section later on in the form where you might deduct a specific project, often it's referred to as channeling, if you are sending the funds on to another project and it doesn't meet the guidelines for accreditation, or essentially for good development. So it would be deducted under, I think it's 5B1 or 2, which is essentially what's referred to as a channeled fund. So you should always include it in 1A, and then we will look at it, or can look at it, and whether it should be deducted. In respect to Sarah's question, which is, would like to report an adjusted AFS amount for 1A, funds to international programs. Where do we put that here? Should we put the AFS amount or the adjusted amount? The adjustment doesn't fall into any of the categories under 5. If there's a specific issue in relation to the 1A, you can actually, and you believe that that should be adjusted, then you can put the adjusted amount, but make sure you include some detail in a reconciliation that you submit. So hopefully that answers your question, Sarah. So there's room later on to submit a reconciliation, usually in the form of Excel spreadsheet, where most NGOs will include the AFS amount and then the actual adjustment and the then RDE amount, and have detail as to why the specific adjustment has occurred. And then I can look at that as part of the assessment. With respect to Anna's question back to deducting a project, so yes, if you believe that you comply with the guidelines, then you wouldn't deduct it. If you believe you have control over the actual program.
Okay, thanks for those great questions. Keep them coming. Yeah, so once you've entered in the figures at 1A, 1B and 2, the system will automatically generate section 3 here, which is your total eligible disbursement. So following on from that, we go through to deductions, so section 4. So just to remind everyone here of the principle of RDE. So recognised development expenditure is the annual eligible expenditure of each accredited NGO using contributions from the Australian community. So if we look here at the figures that are required, so 4A, this should include all DFAT funding received and used for domestic programs or administration costs. And just a reminder to also include interest earned and spent in this section. So for some NGOs, this may be your grant amount plus other DFAT funding, or for some NGOs, it may just be your ANCP grant amount. So 4B, so here you would include funding received from Australian Commonwealth or state government departments or agencies, as this represents all government funding raised through taxation, which is therefore not a measure of community support. You'd also include Australian institutions where the original source of the funding was the Australian government, and you'd also include any funds that you'd receive from other accredited NGOs, because again the original source is from government funding, and therefore these would have already been claimed with the other accredited NGOs when they're submitting their RDE. So grants, contracts and associated interest earned and received from Australian corporate and foundation organisations are eligible for RDE purposes and are not deducted under this section. These costs are considered donations received from the Australian public. So if you have any of those figures, don't include them here in the deduction section. We've got a question that's come through here, which is 4A. Is that as a basic accreditation 150,000 or the amount of the last performance report for the amount expended? And then again, we've got another question that's come through, and someone would just like to confirm whether that includes the 10% administration component of the ANCP grant amount. So basically in here, you have to, this would be your total ANCP grant amount.
As long as you've expended it.
Yes, as long as you've expended it, which presumably you would have. So it's your total grant amount that goes in here. So for base, it would be 150,000, and for full, it would be you know, 300,000 plus the extra portion that you get allocated. Yeah, and so yeah, just clarifying there that if you have a rollover, which you know NGOs can from year to year, this figure here wouldn't include the rollover, as you would account for that in the next submission. So it's just the amount that you've expended for this year. Yep, and it does, that figure there does include the 10% admin.
No, it shouldn't take now.
Okay, I'll hand over to Jeff to discuss the administration component.
Thanks, Rosemary. Yes, the administration component should be relatively easy, but sometimes can be a bit tricky. So just reflecting back on the principle that you need to make sure that you're only deducting expenditure, items of expenditure that were included in your initial amounts, which were 1A, 1B and 2. So for most NGOs, because administration is not included in that amount, you would reduce your DFAT deduction by the 10% allowance. So if you had, for a base organisation, 150,000, then you have allowable 15,000 for administration, so you would only deduct 135,000 under the DFAT 4B category. So yes, it's 135. Now, the only exception to that is if you are using that administration component to fund overseas officers or overseas partners administration, which is allowable under your ANCP funding, and therefore it would have been in the money that you would have sent overseas, i.e. it would have been included in 1A, funds to international programs. So therefore you should deduct it. It should be included in your DFAT deduction. So if you sent that $15,000 to your PNG office to help them offset some of their administration costs, then you would deduct the whole 150,000. Hopefully that clears it all up. But this is one of the areas where I find the most mistakes in the RDE form. And if you do have a difference in the deduction from your DFAT amount, then I'm usually looking for a confirmation in your reconciliation that you have actually considered and adjusted the administration allowance. I'll hand back to Rosemary.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. So now moving on just through the sections of deductions. So we've got the ineligible disbursements. So these are those part of expenditure that don't relate to eligible activities. And the Rte Explanatory Notes have definitions for the categories that are listed here. So again, just encourage everyone to read the notes if you haven't, just to make sure you understand how to translate the definitions to your application. So 5A, if we just move through each of the components here. So 5A is welfare. So welfare are the activities that are designed to maintain beneficiaries in a certain state. So there's no long-term development or no clear sustainable outcome for the communities or beneficiaries that are involved. Religious activities. So these were previously listed as evangelical activities. So now the terminology is consistent with the ACFID Code of Conduct. So religious activities are defined as supporting or promoting a particular religion, including activities undertaken with the intention of converting individuals or groups from one faith or denomination to another. So activities that build up religious structures, including infrastructure, training or organisational activities, are also ineligible for inclusion in RDE. This is unless those structures are specifically designed to provide non-denominational development or relief assistance. Political activities are defined as supporting a political party, candidate or organisation affiliated to a political party and also include activities in support of separatist movements. Again, this brings the RDE definition in line with the ANCP manual. Again, just encourage you to check the Rte Explanatory Notes if you're unsure or need clarification to any of these sections here. 5B1, we have channeled funds, and 5B2, international alliances, networks or consortiums, are those disbursements that your NGO has no direct control or oversight of how the funds are spent. So RDE eligible items are development activities that your own NGO undertakes. We've just got a question here that's going back to 4C. So is a donation considered overseas if received from a domestic organisation but they have obtained funds from an overseas parent?
Essentially, that's probably prima facie okay. So we normally wouldn't go back auditing the source of the of donations from Australian companies. So unless it was a contrived arrangement, don't laugh, I have seen some where it's essentially money donated from one parent to another entity to then donate to the NGO in order to receive some funds from Australian organisations. So if it's just in the normal course of business, then it should be fine. And sometimes these things are not visible at the when I'm doing a desk review of the RDE, but it would be something that would be examined in closer detail during RDE spot checks. Back to you, Rosemary.
Okay, and so the next section here is 5C. So 5C is funds sent to international alliances, networks or consortiums for administration, fundraising and or promotion of the organisation. So this includes administration costs from overseas country offices, which you'll need to list here as a deduction that's following your probable inclusion at line 1A. In your eligible disbursement. So as a general rule, if you're in doubt as to whether or not the activity is eligible, first of all, contact us and ask, or err on the side of caution. You know, we this year in the explanatory notes, we just have a little reminder there to be conservative, just to make sure that you're not overstating your RDE. Yeah, and then at line 6, the system will do the maths and generate your total deductions. So the next section here, pretty straightforward, as I mentioned at the beginning as to the actual calculation of RDE. So basically the system will automatically deduct your total deductions from line 6 from your total eligible disbursements at line 3, and then you'll get your figure here for your total cash RDE. Okay, so we'll move on now, and just looking at the time here, I think we're going to run over time slightly, but yeah, we'll try and get through this next section as quickly as we can. So the next section here is the non-cash RDE, so that's your gifts in kind and your volunteer services. So first of all, non-cash RDE must be recorded in your audited financial statements to be eligible to be included in RDE. So you cannot include this in your RDE submission if it's not included in your AFS. So again, some of you may want to look at this for future years if this is not what you're currently doing. The RDE explanatory notes give clear definitions for gifts in kind and volunteer services. And as well, just a reminder that your gifts in kind and your volunteer services must be sent and used overseas to be eligible. So with volunteer hours, these must be for eligible activities. So these must be on activities that are for overseas development or development education in Australia. This year, the RDE Explanatory Notes, we've got new hourly rates for valuing volunteer hours. And we understand that volunteers may be receiving a higher salary than what's listed in the explanatory note. And, this is not what they may be earning on a day-to-day basis. However, we ask that everyone uses the same rate so that it's equitable between all NGOs. So you can't assign a higher hourly rate to a specialist volunteer because they would be getting paid more in Australia. So the rates of pay are provided so that all NGOs are consistently valuing volunteer hours. So we've got a question here that's popped up and it says, what is the formula to convert the annual rate into the hourly rate for volunteer hours? So you've just read my mind. That was the next point on my slide here. So this year in the RDE Explanatory Notes, we've included a calculation method that's consistent with the DFAT Enterprise Agreement. So it shows you how to calculate the hourly rate. So encourage everyone to go and have a look at that, and we also encourage everyone to use this calculation method from now on if it's different from previous years, so that there's consistency between NGOs. And also, just to add in here, this year we've got rates in this section for medical officers, which we haven't previously had. So yeah, encourage everyone to go and have a look at that. And so we've got here, we've got another question here. So for calculating the hourly salary rate, so it's actually the hourly salary rate. First of all, you take your annual salary and you times that by 12 months over 313. How many working days are in the year? And once you've got that figure, you would divide it by 75. Because that is because there are 75 hours in a fortnight. So hopefully that explanation is correct, and also it's what Yogi W has put up on the chat screen here.
Yeah, so the other one is
yeah.
So there is another question from Joanna, which is regarding what rate should we actually use. As most of you would be aware, and as Rosemary had highlighted, that you do need to include your volunteer services. And gifts in kind included in your audited financial statements. Therefore, you have already done a calculation for volunteer services and gifts in kind if you included them in your 2018 financial statements. So don't go back and redo this calculation, because we will always use the figure that's in the audited financial statements, adjusted for any non-allowable volunteers or gifts in kind. So you'll only use this rate for going forward, essentially for preparing your audited financial statements for this year and the volunteer services calculation in the 2019 audited financial statements.
And we've just got another question here that says, where do we get the hourly rate? So these are in Annex A of the RDE Explanatory Notes. So there's a table there that has the rates of pay for the job descriptions that correlates to the volunteer services that you're relating it to. In Annex A, there's also some adjusted wording this year that just provides more clarification around valuing your volunteer services. So again, just encourage everyone to have a read of this. So once you've entered in your eligible gifts in kind and your volunteer services, line 10 will tally up your total non-cash RDE. And then in line 11, unfortunately there's a system limitation here that it can't just be automatically populated. But so if your total non-cash RDE is higher than your cash RDE, which is at line 7, then you enter in your total cash figure as per line 7. If your non-RDE is equal to or lower than your cash RDE, then you'd enter in your non-cash RDE that's listed at line 10. Okay. The next section here, pretty straightforward, so it's the last steps in terms of calculating your RDE. So basically line 12, the system will automatically calculate line 7, so that's your total cash RDE, and add on your line 11, which is your total non-cash RDE. So this figure here provides your organisation's total RDE. So we've just had a question here that says, can we please repeat that? So I think that's in relation to line 11. So basically, as I said before, your non-cash RDE cannot be bigger than your cash RDE. So if your non-cash RDE is higher than your total cash RDE, which is listed at line 7, you enter in your total cash RDE figure again here at line 11. So it'll be a repeat from line 7 into line 11. And that's because your non-cash RDE can't be bigger than your total cash RDE. If your non-cash RDE is equal to or lower than your cash RDE, you'd enter in the figure that's at line 10. So for example, if at line 7 you had a total cash RDE of $50,000, and then at line 10 you had a total non-cash RDE of $70,000, in line 11 you would re-enter your $50,000 figure which is your total cash RDE. That is because your non-cash RDE is greater than your cash RDE, which unfortunately is impossible. So it's just about figuring whether you use your figure at line 7 or line 10 as to which one goes in line 11. Hopefully that's clear for you. We've also got, after line 12, we've got a section for additional comments. And so just here, please add in anything else that you would like to tell us. For example, if the person who submitted the RDE application is going on leave after 31 March, you can let us know about alternate contact details through this section. Okay, so this section is quite straightforward as well. Basically, it's uploading your annual financial statement as well as your annual report. So there are two options here for both sections, and you can either select to include a website link, which the system will then pop up and allow you to type in a URL link. Alternatively, you can choose to upload a document, so attach a file, and if you select that, you'll be able to upload a document to the system here. So it can be one of each or both, for whichever one, just whichever one suits your NGO best. This next section here is where there is a change from last year, and this section here is where you would add in any documentation that relates to any adjustments for your RDE submission versus your audited financial statements. So this year we've got two sections where you can either select that you'll attach additional documentation, and then there's the section here that allows you to browse for a file and upload your supporting documentation. Or the alternate one is for you to select the option which says you certify that there are no requirements to upload documentation as everything in the RDE submission is as per your audited financial statement. So hopefully that's clear to everyone for the questions that were raised earlier about where to submit those documentations if you need to show any variances in here. The next section here again is straightforward. It's the contact details. So this is the most relevant financial officer in your organisation who has overseen the RDE process and that can answer any questions if either Jeff or DFAT needs to get in contact with you. So it's probably most likely going to be different to the ANCP contact that we have. And just a reminder that if you have prepared your RDE submission and you're away during April, please make sure you leave alternate contact details so that if we need to, we can get in contact with you. And that last section of the form in here is to the very end, so don't forget to have your authorising officer, so whether that's your CEO or head of your NGO, whatever it is called, they need to sign the declaration that you can access through the form, and then this needs to be attached and uploaded. If it's not, unfortunately, the system won't allow you to submit your application. So make sure, particularly as well, that you have that done before Friday, the 29th of March, just in case your CEO or whoever the contact person is, isn't available on the weekend. Now we'll quickly try and go through, and I know we've hit the hour mark, but Jeff will just quickly run through some common errors and issues. Some of the stuff that's covered up here we have touched on previously, so we'll try and condense this and move through as quickly as we can.
Thanks, Rosemary. Yes, a couple of these we've already mentioned. So one is just making sure you use the organisation name and not your own name when you log in or registering for the first time. Also making sure that the figures can tie back to the audited financial statements. So if you are changing figures, particularly some of the key figures from those in the financial statements, then it's helpful to just include a simple Excel document reconciliation that just highlights the audited financial statements figure and the RDE figure, and then just explaining the difference. It's particularly useful in respect to the DFAT component, so that I can see you've actually reduced that for your administration costs, and there are a number of other areas where many NGOs submit reconciliations. Otherwise, I will usually send an email just confirming whether or not you've actually considered the administration if you have different figures compared to your audited financial statements. Making sure that they're not drafts, and also making sure that your volunteer services and gifts in kind were actually reported in the audited financial statement. So the audited financial statement should show the actual value and also the method of valuation for gifts in kind and volunteer services. That can be on the face of the financial statement, or it can simply be included as a note to the accounts. Also, inclusion of ineligible disbursements, so for welfare, organisations not deducting welfare. Most NGOs, if they are doing a small welfare component of their programs, will have a process that they discuss with the programs to make a reasonable estimate of the percentage of a program that might include a welfare component and deduct that. We already talked about the ANCP administration allowance. So I think hopefully that's clear to most people. So you should be reducing your DFAT ANCP funding by the 10%. That's assuming, obviously, that you have spent all that 10% on admin, which of course most NGOs do, and that you haven't actually included it or sent it overseas to help fund some of your overseas partners' administrations. Channel funds, before as well, we had a question regarding a project. So if you're comfortable that you have control over the project, then you wouldn't deduct it here. Some NGOs do receive donations from various sources around Australia, and they are asking them to forward them on to particular projects for which the NGO doesn't have any specific control. They would normally be deducting those under this area, which is 5B1. And I think Rosemary already mentioned just making sure if somebody is away, if it's the first week or something of April, or what, you can just let them know in the details so I can try and contact them either before or after any holiday periods or nominate an alternate.
So just to quickly touch base, we've got a question here that's just asking where they can upload the calculation if you have any adjustments from your audited financial statement. So if we just go back here to this slide, it comes after the spot where you upload your audited financial statements and your annual report. So here is where the section you can either select to upload additional documentation, or you can choose that you don't have a requirement to upload additional documentation. So hopefully that's clear to you as you move through the form as to where these documentations get uploaded. Okay, so getting us back on track, just hopefully I know we've gone over the hour mark, and I just want everyone to, please hang with us, and we've only got, a short while to go, so hopefully you're still in, the party happy phase of listening to the RDE. Next, we'll just quickly touch on the process for the RDE Spot Check. So up to 7 NGOs can be selected for RDE Spot Check in 2019. These will all be done before the end of the financial year, and it's usually undertaken during June. DFAT will notify you that you have been selected, and you'll have a minimum of 10 days notice, that the process will begin. And it can be both base or full NGOs that are selected for an RDE Spot Check, so anyone that submitted their application. We just ask, if you are selected for an RDE Spot Check, that you assist Jeff with everything that needs to be undertaken. First of all, we'll run through, Jeff will run through the agenda shortly, but just to let you know that there's a desk review, which is a one-day, there's a desk review, sorry, and then there's a one-day site visit. So hopefully it doesn't take up too much of your time. Then a draft report to NGOs will be sent within 5 days, and then the report will come to DFAT within 15 days of the visit. And there are the terms of reference available in the ANCP manual, which is available on the website. Yeah. Okay, so now I'll hand back over and Jeff will talk through the agenda of the spot checks that he undertakes.
Thanks, Rosemary. So, as many of you would be aware, the RDE criteria for accreditation, which used to be section E4, has actually been dropped out of the accreditation criteria with the changes that happened late last year, and there's simply a check to make sure that you meet the eligibility requirements before your accreditation, and then the actual checking will take place through the RDE desk audit process that happens after your March submission, and then the selection of NGOs for RDE Spot Checks. That's become the way that we actually look at sort of RDE and check that going forward. So essentially, you'll receive advice from DFAT and that you've been selected. I'll then initiate contact and organise a time that's convenient, and so that the key people can actually be there. So normally that'll be the relevant finance person who was involved in preparing the RDE submission, and potentially also a program person. I will look at your RDE and supporting work papers submitted. I may request additional information in advance, such as a list of your projects that have been included in the RDE, in the most recent RDE. And then we'll conduct a site visit. I'll go through and look at in more detail the source of those, the source of the numbers that have been included on your submission. I'll specifically look at the valuation around any volunteer services and gifts, and essentially auditing the RDE worksheet back against your records. And as part of that, then looking at the nature of the projects and whether those projects are eligible for inclusion in the RDE submission. We'll then conduct an exit interview. We'll inform you of any over or under adjustments that have been identified through the process. Those adjustments would be adjusted in the RDE desk audit process in the following year. It would simply be adjustment against your previously submitted RDE and would form part of the calculation of your 3-year rolling RDE average. Some of the issues that typically come out of the audits are around that administration costs being incorrectly included, which means your RDE has actually been understated. In lack of records or not sufficient segregation between fundraising expenditure and community education costs. So you do need to have appropriate records to actually support that community education calculation, and lack of attention to the understanding of the definitions of what should be included, which is simply going back to the Rte Explanatory Notes and the Accredited Code of Conduct around the community education. The other one is unavailability of key personnel. Often makes it much harder from my perspective. So, yeah, in response to Maria's question, so does that mean there is no RDE check as part of accreditation visits post-desk assessment? Yes, that is correct. You would have been, as part of your submission, if you're already an accredited agency, there's a pre-eligibility requirement that we as a accreditation assessor see, that is actually your RDE for the last 3 years, and so we look at that and make sure that the average of that 3-year calculation actually meets the RDE requirement, and if so, then that's a tick as part of the pre-assessment process. If you didn't meet that, you wouldn't proceed through to the desk assessment process. Yes, in response, certainly you can lodge your RDE at any time from now. Obviously, for those of you who are using your 30 June 2018 financials, they're well and truly done. So nothing to stop you lodging RDE now. So I do encourage earlier submissions, and I will get to them as soon as possible. As many of you are aware, it's right in the middle of accreditation season for many at the moment, so I've been quite busy doing accreditations and got a couple more to go. But so I will look at RDEs as they come through and I get the chance. I do have to actually go into Smarty Grants to check that there are some there that no automatic notification. I'll hand back to Rosemary unless there's any late questions, and we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff, and thanks to everyone for hanging, as we've gone over the hour mark, but hopefully all the questions that were asked throughout, gave everyone the answers that they needed to submit your RDE application. So, yeah, we've made it. We're at the end. Thanks again to everyone who's attended. Just a reminder that this presentation will be published on the ACFA YouTube channel, and the presentation will be sent out. But if you, for some reason don't get it, please get in contact with the ANCP team. We're more than happy to share that around. We've just got the contact details up here, and as well as resources if any of you guys need it. So we've got the DFAT ANCP team, so we've got our phone number there as well as the email address, so ancp@dfat.gov.au. We've also got Jeff's contact details up there if you need to get in contact with him directly. And then, as we move through the presentation, we talked about the resources, so the Rde Explanatory Notes, the ANCP manual, and the ANCP funding policy. So the links are provided there if you need it. Thank you again. So we're wrapping up now, and just like to say thank you to ACFID for hosting us today, and again thanks to everyone for participating. I think as Vicky mentioned earlier, there's just a short survey to complete at the end of this, so please stay on the line for that. But otherwise, hope everyone has a lovely afternoon, and we hope that today was useful and gave you the tools that you need to submit your application. So thanks very much, everyone, and look forward to seeing you throughout the year if we meet. Thanks a lot.